everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Beyond the Benefits. I'm one of your hosts, Zoe Kobrin, VP of Marketing here at CCA, joined by my wonderful co-host here, Mark DeFee. Mark, do you want to say a quick introduction?
Hey, everybody. Yep, I'm Mark DeFee, the VP of Clinical Insights and Market Analysis. And Zoe, I think you're wonderful too.
Thank you, Mark. And today we're excited to be talking about mental health awareness. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and as clinicians and working with an employee assistance program, I think we are always grateful for anything that puts more of a spotlight on mental health and gets that conversation going. And I don't know about you, Mark, what I've found over the years is that during these awareness months, there's often a focus on these sort of big initiatives, right? Or kind of one-time projects, promotions to increase. And what we really wanted to do today was to break it down a little bit and think about how we can encourage organizations and individuals to think about ways in which they can keep that awareness alive really throughout the year.
Yeah. And like you said, always appreciative for the visibility. May, a lot of times, though, is kind of that rah mental health is important and you need to take care of yourself. And then it kind of leaves it there. So, what do we mean by awareness and how does it apply to the different areas of your life? I think is such an important conversation and a kind of introspective exercise that people should be doing to make sure that they understand the full scope of awareness.
Yeah, exactly. And so our thought for today was to kind of look at awareness on a couple of different levels, right? Our own self-awareness, our awareness of people around us and how they're doing, from a professional as well as a personal perspective. Also, just the awareness of what's going on around us within our community, within the workplace, and really looking at how mental health issues can manifest in terms of physical symptoms, social interactions, really coming at it from that lens.
Yeah, and I love how, Zoe, you and I always talk about you got to start with the individual and yourself and being able to recognize you mentioned physical symptoms, recognize not only the mental health, the psychological symptoms, but also understanding that a lot of times, especially for guys, it is the physical symptoms they notice first, and then they can kind of back into, oh, there are some, mental health issues going on that I need to be paying attention to. Uh, so I think starting with the individual is so important. But what else can individuals do besides paying attention to physical symptoms?
I think understanding how stress or other mental health issues present themselves for you as an individual, right? So for example, I might know that when I'm stressed, when I'm feeling sad, I might sort of withdraw, right, from people
Yeah.
who I'm close with. I might have less patience with my family members.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so I think that helping individuals to kind of tune in, even just taking that pause to check in with ourselves is not something that we do regularly, right? And I always say there's power in the pause. So just being able to
Ah,
take, a minute and to kind of almost like mentally frisk yourself, like, how am I doing, right?
yeah.
What's happening for me? How am I feeling in my physical body as well as emotionally?
Yeah, and that's such a good point because one thing when I'm working with coaching and counseling clients, we talk quite a bit about you have to be your own coach. You need to be able to tell yourself, "Hey, pause. You're not in the right headspace," and part of that is understanding, your triggers, for kind of lack of a better term there, but what gets you in that escalated state and understanding again, what you need to do to come out of it to get back on track. And I love that phrase, power in the pause. I hadn't heard that before, but it's so true. I have so many clients who will come to session reporting a moment they wish they had back. It
Mm.
wasn't like this ongoing thing, but I was in a meeting and I said something I immediately regretted. And sometimes they can't even identify like why they said it or what was going on, but they just knew it wasn't the right thing to say and that they almost had no control over what they were doing.
Yeah, yeah, we get into this mode where we're sort of just reacting, and so we're not taking that step back. And I think that kind of translating this into something that, organizations can do is to even encourage, a moment in the morning, like a
Yeah.
morning moment of mindfulness, encouraging people to step out on their lunch break, to take a moment. And that is just a really kind of simple, non-threatening way in which organizations can keep this conversation around mental well-being
Yeah.
going.
And you're so right because behaviorally, individuals need to look at their behavior, but as organizations, they need to look at the behaviors they're encouraging.
Mhm.
Are you encouraging people to slow down and be thoughtful when something arises, or is it just such a frenetic, fast-paced organization that that's not even a consideration? You just need to go, 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 regardless of how it's impacting you.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So and even things like setting boundaries sometimes around what time people are emailing, like even things like that can translate to like, okay, let's emphasizing that we all need that time just
Yeah,
to take a step back, refresh. So I think that all of those things, in addition to just continually hosting, whether it's seminars on, emotional intelligence, self-care, these are all great ways to continue to help people to look within.
yeah. Yeah, and, we're kind of blurring the awareness of ourselves as well as the organization, but, organizations are made up of individuals. And so understanding how our behaviors translate into a workplace culture, I think is important because there's some very practical things here, like, especially for leaders, awareness of the benefits available, being able to speak about them like in off the cuff conversations and be knowledgeable makes a big difference because one, that person that the leader might be talking to can really benefit from that information, but it's also subtly saying this leader has taken enough time to go learn about it to be able to explain to their employees because it's important for them. And so it's even practical things like how well do you know your benefits and could you explain them to someone else who might be in a heightened acuity state and might not be thinking as clearly. Can you point them in a good direction without just saying, "Well, go check the intranet site. I think there's something there."
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's such an important piece of it. It's just in general making people aware. And then also for leaders in particular, empowering them to feel comfortable identifying warning signs, right? That somebody
Yeah,
isn't okay. And no, knowing that, but also then feeling comfortable taking the next step, right? Not trying to
yeah,
be the therapist, but helping get them connected to the appropriate resources.
such
And
a
that's
good point.
important thing for that's where EAPs can really play an important role, right? In doing that training for leaders.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right, I skipped ahead to what do you say to someone, but it starts with
That's really
how do you
important too.
recognize when someone is, struggling? And so that signs and symptoms aspect and learning, how to respond in that moment is crucial, but this also plays into how we were talking about the individual, and if people aren't taking care of themselves, then they might not be able to notice the people in their life who are struggling or who need support. So there is this interconnectedness between ourselves and how helpful we can be to others.
Absolutely. And as you were saying that, I was just thinking about, within an organization, we were talking about leaders being on the lookout for warning signs, but really important for coworkers to be looking out
Yeah,
for each other as well. I know we've had some great success with peer coaching programs. Um, but like you said, if individuals are kind of at their max with stress or they're not doing well, they're going to have much less bandwidth to try to help someone else, right? So
yeah,
everybody benefits when each of us practices that self-care or has that. self-reflection.
Absolutely. And I don't know about you, but a lot of times it's the people in my life who are pointing out to me when I'm, snippy or
Mhm.
I've shut down, whatever. But sometimes I'm not even recognizing it. And so I
Right.
need external people, whether it's coworkers, family, friends, whoever, saying, "Hey, Mark, you're not, acting yourself. You might need to pause,
Yeah.
and power in the pause there again." But if we haven't created a space where people feel comfortable pointing that out to us, we could continue to continue a behavior that we don't mean to. We're just not paying attention enough to know we need to change something.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. And then being able to be receptive to that, right? And to think about, okay, what do I need, right? I think that's one of the most
Yeah.
important questions we can ask as individuals and as organizations. Like, what's happening for me right now? And what would be most helpful?
Yeah. Absolutely. And like that most helpful, if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, Mark, you're just not yourself. I'm worried you're taking on too much." We also have to be aware of how we're responding to that. And I think one thing we have to keep in mind is being grateful this person came forward because they didn't have to. And we could have, again, continued that negative behavior that we don't want to. We just didn't pay attention to it. But think about if you make some, snide, snarky comment to the person or you get angry, they're probably not going to come point it out again. And if that's your biggest way of identifying negative behaviors, you don't want to shut down people who need to come to you, especially coworkers, because you've heard this so many times that we spend so much time in the workplace every week. They really have a feel for our baseline behavior. And
Mhm.
they're able to identify when something's different than normal.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And I'm wondering if I feel like we've touched on some kind of small yet really important steps that both individuals and organizations can take. I'm wondering if it would be helpful to talk a little bit about just a few other things that organizations could do,
Yeah.
kind of throughout the year to continue to sort of gently nudge people in that direction of taking a step back, of reflecting, of creating an environment where people do feel comfortable, sharing feedback with one another.
Yeah. And, I have a few ideas, I'm happy to jump in there with, but what came to mind for you?
I think that, one of the most important things that can be done is one of what you just said is having that open door environment, right? Making sure that people feel comfortable asking for help, that people feel comfortable giving feedback as appropriate, right? And
Yeah.
receiving
Yeah.
feedback.
It's still a workplace, yeah.
A psychologically safe environment and one that really puts an emphasis on well-being, right? And looking at, what might be working well already for us and where are some areas where we, could make some tweaks to help people to feel a little more comfortable.
Yeah. And, like we mentioned, May is great. Uh, Keeping EAP and behavioral health benefits visible throughout the year is important. And there are some easy ways to do that. I mean, the low hanging fruit, promotional pieces, emails, whatever. But even diving down another level, stories. Stories are so impactful. And so if you have uh, advocates within your organization who have stories to share around mental health conditions, it is important to tap into them and make them comfortable sharing their story. And what I've seen as the biggest way to do that is getting to the highest level of leadership possible and helping them understand the importance of this because if you look at the data, it's not just a feel good, this is the right thing to do type story. These are business and performance outcomes that change when you lean into well-being. I mean, there's enough data out there saying there is a correlation between our mental health and our performance, which I mean, just makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that those are great suggestions. And, you know, thinking too about, again, just how can we make this part of the daily dialogue, right? To be even things like, checking in before a meeting starts. Maybe instead of just immediately jumping into the business, it's, well, how are you doing? Especially if it's a one-on-one, right?
Yeah.
And not wanting to pry, but just to show people that we actually do care about how they
Yeah.
are. Um, Encouraging use of time off, right? Encouraging breaks. All of these things are so important. And sometimes I know that some organizations work with are even making a point of having one day out of the month, once a quarter, where they have somebody physically on site, whether it's a representative from the EAP, it's somebody talking about, meditation or massage, but just again, keeping alive that idea of, hey, it's really important that we take care of ourselves.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one other, piece I'll mention is the different generations in the workplace. They have different views on mental health, mental well-being, as well as how much to share at work. And there's this dynamic of older workers who are normally in leadership positions, uh, typically having a different view on mental health and how much a workplace should be involved there. But they're also leading a lot of younger workers who believe there should be more connection between our mental health and the work we do. And one of the coolest things I heard a company doing, this was a little while ago, was they were doing some reverse mentoring. So they assigned a leader, an employee that the leader helped them as they advanced in their career, but the younger employee also helped the leader gain awareness on how to talk about different topics. But it came from a place of both wanting to learn from the other. It wasn't a this is what I'm talking about with the younger employees and the things that bother me. It truly was a, hey, I want to learn more about this, and I feel like I don't know what I don't know. So can you teach me? And it really created this cool culture where leaders weren't above learning, and they showed this was an important topic to them.
I love that. Yeah, I think that anytime there can be that exchange and both people really being open to learning from each other, it's just so powerful.
It is.
Well, thank you, Mark. This has been a really great conversation as always, and I just want to let, everyone listening out there know this is our passion. We're certainly here if you have questions, if we can be helpful in kind of strategizing plans going forward, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And again, thank you all for taking the time to join. Mark, thank you as always.
Yeah, Zoe, it's always a great time talking with you. So excited for our next episode next month.
Same here. All right. Well, have a good rest of the week, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Take care.